Hello, and thanks for joining us on yet another Barry Hawkins Live with your unsurprising host, me, Barry Hawkins. That's where the name comes from, right? Well, in this episode, we are reaching the last of the events in an effective development cycle. That is the recurring series of specific meetings with interactions, concluding it all with the last event in the cycle, the cycle retrospective. Scrum would call it the sprint retrospective, though don't rush through them despite the name, as we'll be talking about. So let's jump in. What is the cycle retrospective or sprint retrospective? It's intended to be a focused meeting. I default to 50 minutes, where the team is coming together to reflect on how the cycle went and how they did at being a team during the cycle. And the retrospective is a key part of what makes a Scrum and other batch development processes like XP or anything unbranded work, because all of those, honestly, all of the flavors of development process, agile development process, reflect or fall under a categorization of empirical process control, an empirical process control system. And there are three key components in an empirical process control system. You need transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Now, transparency comes through all of the activities that we're doing throughout the rest of the development cycle. But the retrospective is where the greatest amount of inspection and adaptation come, because we are looking at the cycle, how it went. We're discussing it together, inspecting it, and seeing where and how should we adapt in order to improve in our next upcoming development cycle and in our working together as a cross-functional development team. Speaking of team, the first key point about effective cycle retrospectives is that they should include the whole team. I know I sound like a broken record when I talk about these things, but there's some training and some literature that would have you believe that only the cross-functional team members outside of the team steward or scrum master or product steward or product owner, that it's the scrum master and the team members. Or I've encountered some organizations that think it's supposed to be the scrum master and the engineers, and QA and UX can't come. None of that is true. The team that curates that team backlog, that prepares for an upcoming sprint and backlog grooming, and that comes into a development cycle and plans that cycle or sprint together, they are meant to be the ones who come into the retrospective together. It's meant to be the whole team. And yes, it is supposed to include the product steward, because if you have one or more members of the team not there, as you're invariably focusing on how a development cycle went and where there may be opportunities for improvement or where there may be frustrations or challenges, if one or more parties are not present, it creates an odd dynamic, because they're not there to hear what others are saying in general or specifically about them, and they also don't have a chance to contribute or respond to what's being said, or what would otherwise be asked of them if they were in the room. So the whole team together. If you haven't done it before, try it. I think you'll like it. Even though it may surface some tensions, that are latent or have built up because they've been outside of the cycle, or because the team doesn't really have cohesion yet, having them all together in the retrospective, having those conversations, identifying those experiments, it can be a great start to begin to have that cohesion. So in the retrospective, in terms of the format and flow, you want it to be very conversational, very much the team interacting and focused and engaged with one another. And so when you begin the retrospective, start with the cycle. I tend to use my development log as a visual artifact to just quickly recap, this is what we did, this is what we went through, here's the backlog and non-backlog stuff that happened, available capacity. And from that recap of the cycle, then shift to having the conversation focus on teamwork. That is, how did we do at being a team? What things worked well? Were there handoffs that were just really, really smooth? Or were there some handoffs that went for a long time because one person was done with something 2 or 3 days before the next person to work on it realized that? And well, let's have a conversation about why we think that happened. And just have good dialogue. And that is when you're having those conversations, that sets the stage to enable you to mine for those real nuggets of possible adaptations that might greatly improve how you work together as a team. So team stewards, in Scrum, this would be a Scrum Master. Team stewards, they are on the hook for facilitating the conversation. So, and I explicitly use the term facilitate here because you're meant to be drawing people into conversation, not driving them through a 50-minute tour de force of, well, let's recap the sprint, let's talk about why we didn't do everything we thought we would. Not that. You're not meant to be driving a conversation, because when you drive a conversation, you are often the primary speaker. It's like, I'm going to drag you all through this retrospective. Not the intent. Tends not to make for great retrospectives. So ensure that you're facilitating the conversation and read the room. And this, very, very often this is, reading the physical room, but increasingly as we have distributed teams, and certainly throughout, the massive work from home experiment that has been the pandemic, we've seen, you're reading the Zoom room. So ensure that you have, or, whatever platform you're using. So ensure that you have a nice full view of all of your team members, and, and have the agreement. It's video on and not on mute during the retrospective. We're supposed to all be talking, interacting, interfacing with one another, and be sure to scan the group and look for. There are two key things that I coach team stewards to do. One, well, let me frame it this way. I had a facilitator once provide this frame of mind to me. He said, there are external processors and internal processors. External processors work things through verbally in the room with people. Internal processors sit and they are listening to all of the inputs of all of the other people who are talking, and they're taking all of that into consideration, processing it, and then responding. Well, in a team retrospective, you need to do two things. One, you need to make sure that the external processors don't run roughshod over the rest of the group, and that any one external processor is not monopolizing too much of the time. So that facilitation tactic of being able to say, get someone, okay, well, thank you. All right, that's good input. So pause there. Does anyone else have input? Do the, get them to sort of, pump the brakes and let's let some other people contribute. And you'll often have more than one external processor. So, you're reading and watching that. But also, look for your internal processors. They usually are, they're quiet, they're withholding, but they do seem engaged. they're definitely listening to what others are saying. And that facilitator gave me this phrase. He would say in group sessions, all right, we've heard from all the external processors. Now, you internal processors, you've been sitting here contemplating, listening to this, thinking things over. We want to hear from you. What do some of you have to say? And you prompt them, because it's very easy for some internal processors, because they're just used to being talked over. They're thinking and they have a lot to say. It just rarely happens because they're not being drawn into conversation, and they haven't built a personal toolkit of being able to insert themselves into conversational dynamics, because it's not the most natural thing for everyone. And I have had some of the most profound observations and memorable and impactful retrospectives have been where an internal processor finally, spoke up or was afforded the opportunity to speak or contribute. And it's like they've synthesized everyone else's thoughts and feelings around a topic at hand. They package that all together with their own insights and just really crystallize a given topic. So make sure you're giving those internal processors the opportunity to participate and contribute. Another key point: as a team, focus on your sphere of agency. That is, focus on the retrospective should be focused on things that you as a team can control, the things about which you can affect change. Affect change, actually, I think. And this is an anti-pattern that I see often, is that a retrospective, if people are frustrated about things outside of the team, talking about a retrospective, it can usually snowball into what's wrong with our department or the whole company or corporate life in general, or the Scala community or what have you. It's to take your pick, right? None of those are within the sphere of agency of the team. Focus on what we can do together as a team, what we have within our control. Now, if there are topics that are coming up outside of your sphere of agency or influence, and they're coming up again and again, well, you might, maybe that warrants bringing an issue, escalating an issue to management or leadership. And the teams, the team steward and product steward, but usually the team steward predominantly, can, gather that input and bring that to management or leadership so that you can surface that topic. But stewing on it in a retrospective is a waste of precious time that you all could be looking, that the team could be looking at. What can we do about our situation that we control, and what could we do in the upcoming cycle that's just, a day ahead of us. Lastly, when you're looking at things within your sphere of agency, things that you can affect or control, look for experimentation opportunities. That is, if a pain point's coming up, this could have gone better. Okay, well, how might it go better? What might we try that could look better? Like one that was really massive for me on a number of teams where I was in engineering individual contributor or a team steward, is build breakages, people breaking the build. We have an automated build with automated test suites, and someone would check something in, break the build. And on many teams, anytime I would hear that come up, I would say, well, okay, well, let's just, it's safe space. Honest answers only, please. How long is everyone going before committing their changes back when we weren't using distributed version control? But now, how long before you push to master or push to, whatever branch you're working off of? And if people's answers are 2 to 5 days, well, now we have an opportunity to experiment. What if we all decided to try something that might improve that. And the experiment I have always, when I get that sort of answer, the experiment I've always proposed is, how about we all commit to daily pushes to master? So as you get toward the end of your day, you're working and you can see what time it is. Work your tests or your code or, the assets you're working on. Work toward having those in a good landing spot so that you can merge to master, push to master before heading out. And we would identify that experiment and say, what is the success criteria? What would make this a good thing to keep doing? And if we come to, and it was basically, do we experience fewer build breakages? And if we come to the end of the next cycle and we've all been doing our, pushes to daily, and we're seeing fewer builds, cool, let's keep that up. If we're still seeing tons of build breakages, well, that experiment doesn't seem to have worked. What else might we try? But, so let's try something, have a success criteria, evaluate it in the cycle that we tried in, hopefully the next cycle. If it works, great, let's adopt it. If not, try something else. Let's continue to experiment. But what we definitely don't want to do is just resign ourselves to, well, we break the build a lot here. Sucks, but that's us. No, nobody wants to live that way, right? At least I don't think so. So let's avoid that by continuing to experiment and adapt together. There's one last thing I wanted to share, which is you can also have to learn from one another. Having an open classroom model, it provided your team feels psychological safety and comfortable with it, allowing people from other teams, like just one person, like not a bunch of people, but people to come in and observe. If you're feeling like your retrospectives are going really well, letting other people see them as sort of a living classroom can be a great way to share and expand your knowledge and success within the rest of your organization. And that's our guidance for today and recommendation around effective cycle retrospectives. Now let's see, what questions does the evening hold for us? Our stalwart, John Mayer, asks, I've been pondering how to do a retrospective for interdependent teams, a retrospective equivalent of the Scrum of Scrums. Thoughts? Yes. The practice I have used most often here is to have periodic retrospectives for a group of teams, sometimes on a quarterly basis, sometimes after every significant release, or major release of the product, and that's assuming that significant and major releases happen fairly often for the product that you work on these days. And bringing them together in a facilitated retrospective, I definitely put a bit more structure and format around those, because you have a larger group. Bringing them all together and getting them to be thinking about and reasoning about the same things it's a bit more work, but super rewarding. In fact, that would probably be that's a good backlog topic for a Barry Hawkins Live episode. Thank you for that idea. I'm already thinking about what we might be able to do with that. So thank you for that question. It's great. Love it. All right. What next? What if people don't speak up? Well, I'll say, this is a super common problem, super common challenge, because not everyone is accustomed to inserting themselves into conversational dynamics. Not everyone, and some people find themselves in teams or organizations where it's not safe to talk about failure, or allow yourself to be vulnerable to talking about what concerns you, or whether you feel, you're out of your depth or your team is out of their depth, if I admit that, then we're going to be skewered. We'll be out of here. People have to feel safe. And not worried about a lack of psychological safety. And it does come back to that facilitation. Facilitation techniques can help a lot and can give you a toolkit for drawing people into that conversation. So facilitation techniques is probably be another good episode. Everybody's giving me all kinds of ideas today. Love it. All right. What do you do when things outside your team negatively impact the cycle? Well, you definitely talk about them. And so when I talk about, your sphere of agency, I'm not saying don't talk about when things outside the team, you have things come in hot, or there's all this, you get a load of interrupt-driven stuff dumped on you. Talk about it, talk about how you handle it, that sort of thing. But I would say, talk about that, highlight it, and look for those things outside the team. How did they come to negatively impact us? Was there a group that we should have looped in on a conversation and we didn't, and now we're here, right? Or did was this one stakeholder not aware of the timeline that from when they request something to when we can have it turned around? Was there something like that? A misunderstanding around timelines, sequencing, dependencies, that sort of thing. So talk about it, reason about it, see if you can get to what do we think the root cause was of this having, this negative impact, and then work with and interact, converse with those outside parties or forces to see what you can do to improve that. Right. What tools or techniques do you prefer for visual collaboration? So visual retrospective facilitation it's been around for ages, but it's certainly become more popular, and a few companies have started that have as their primary product a visual facilitation retrospective tool. They those can work well when they're used properly. Like so many other tools, they sometimes attempt to compensate for the fact that not everyone knows how to facilitate a retrospective effectively. And so what can happen is that the input is happening, people are putting stuff in ahead of the retrospective, and the team steward is sifting through those or putting them up on the screen and saying, trying to get people like, all right, talk about the one you put, and you talk about yours. Visual retro facilitation can be super helpful, but make sure that you're not leaning too heavily on the tool and interaction is going down. It's at the heart of that first point of the Agile Manifesto around favoring individuals and their interactions with one another over processes and tools. That is, not leaning on a tool to substitute or replace the people on the team interacting together. I'll say that tools like I've had better results with tools like Lucidchart and Miro, where they just got a great drawing collaboration framework. So it feels more like, it's to me, it's closer to what you would be doing if you had Post-its and were doing visual retrospective facilitation in person. Whereas some of the tools that, things become very templated, and it takes some of the fluidity and the high interaction out of the equation, unless you're like really, really careful to stay in front of that. Well, gang, that's it for Effective Cycle Retrospectives, Sprint Retrospectives today. It's been an absolute pleasure going through the events of effective development process. There are other areas that we're going to be covering. There are roles in effective development process. There are artifacts in effective development process, and metrics. Those are the core items. Those are the core areas of effective development process that I practice and coach. So we'll be delving into those next, and I'm looking forward to seeing all of you, and especially seeing your great questions that add so much to talking about this material in the coming weeks. So until next time, be well, and I wish you the most effective development process and healthy teams you can possibly have. Take care.